thrill seekers. Groove is in the heart. So I want to keep talking about love because I've established a theme here for Valentine's week. And I think I'd said already that when one searches through, when I search through the works of Dogen Zenji, there's not a whole lot of stuff about love. In fact, love was not something we talked about much in Nishijima Roshi's classes. Tim McCarthy, my first teacher, would talk about it a little bit more, but not so much. It's certainly different from the Christian thing from Christianity, where you talk about love all the time, and there are these different varieties of love, eros love and agape love. My understanding of the New Testament, which is limited, is that the word translated as love in English is often the word eros and often the word agape, and they both have different meanings, and you probably better get a Christian scholar to talk to you about that. But eros is more like romantic love. It's the root of the word erotic. And agape is this more universal love that God has for us all and so forth. But Zen doesn't talk about love too much. So let me think of some stories I can tell you about that. One time when I was first leading the retreats that Nishijima Roshi had established in Japan, this might have been my first retreat or my second or third. It was very early on in my career of leading my teacher's retreats because he decided to retire from leading them himself. These French women came to the retreat. And I mentioned them when I was in France and did a video from France, but they, after about a day of the Zen retreat, decided they were going to leave because they felt the whole thing was too cold. And they felt that Zen was leading them to a path where they would no longer experience the highs and lows of emotions, and they wanted love and things like this. It's interesting to me to think about this because these days, if somebody decides to leave a retreat, I just let them leave. I don't even bother talking to them usually. But at that point, I was still of the mind that you should try to keep people in the retreat, and so I tried to talk them out of leaving, but I couldn't. So some people feel that love is a very important thing to them. One of the things about Zen as a thing, as whatever it is that it's very emotionally cool, and I think for people like me who are generally kind of emotionally cool anyway, it's a good fit. Because I don't like a lot of touchy-feely, huggy, lovey stuff in my life. I'm rather prickly and don't like a lot of that stuff. So I'm very content to leave the talk of love out of the equation. This is probably why I did okay in Japan, whereas a lot of Americans, a lot of non-Japanese have trouble in Japan because the Japanese culture is very emotionally cool. For example, talking about love, the phrase aishiteiru, which would be about as close as you can get to saying I love you, is a phrase you don't hear very much in Japan. Even among married couples, they rarely say it. In fact, if a husband suddenly said to his wife, "Aishiteiru, I love you," she'd probably wonder what was wrong. Like, is he dying or something? What's happening? Why would he say such a thing? It doesn't come up that much. The word that does come up more often, maybe not even all that much, is ski, which is a much lighter term than I, which is love. I means love, and ski is more like. That comes up. Or just calling your spouse anata, which means you. Literally, if you look it up in a dictionary, it'll say means you. But it has a kind of feeling of affection to it if it's said in the right context. So that's about as close as you get. So you don't get big proclamations of love. Now, in preparation for my first video about love, which I didn't get to, I collected some instances where Kobun Chino Otogawa Roshi had talked about love. And in case you don't know who Kobun Chino is, that's a picture of him. And he was my first teacher's teacher. So he died in 2002, but he was a Japanese Buddhist monk who came to America and taught in both California and Taos, New Mexico. He also had a place In Switzerland, Ziggy is barking at my father-in-law, so that's how he shows his love to my father-in-law. So let's get into some of what Kobun says about love, and we'll just ignore Ziggy's proclamations of love here. This is, I believe this is from Embracing Mind. I'm finding these quotes in PDFs and things that I'm not sure correspond exactly to the book, but I think this is in Embracing Mind. So here it goes. It's titled Life Force. Of course, Kobun didn't give these things titles. He just spoke, and then they collected his words and titled them in different sections. Here we go. Day and night, the heart beats regularly, whether or not you are aware of it. The breathing continues with a certain rhythm. Your sense organs function amazingly, and brain, eyes, hands, which way you move every moment are all spontaneous. These are taken care of in a split second. What kind of life is it? Do you call it a human being? In the Buddhist custom, we don't name it human. It is simply life. And with surprise and amazement, we call it Buddha nature. This is the total dynamic awakening nature. This life force is seeking an object to love. Love, in this case, means give something of yourself. Legs move you, compassion drives you to move toward the object. When you see a knowledgeable, experienced person, naturally you feel deep admiration, causing a magnetic pull toward that person. When you start to observe such impulses, you finally find out what are the contents of this magnetic force. When you see somebody suffering in pain or illness, immediately you go closer to find out what you can do for this person. The same life force makes you want to share your knowledge and wisdom. All beings have inborn Buddha nature. So that's an interesting way to look at the concept of love. And as I say, he's a Japanese person, so I didn't know Kobun personally, but most Japanese people are by nature very emotionally cool. One of the interesting things I noticed in Japan is one of the, I think, most confusing things to a Japanese person about we Americans or Europeans indeed, and people from various countries, is how open we are with our emotions. They don't understand that because the culture really values being rather closed with your emotions and keeping them to yourself for the most part. So that's the kind of culture we're dealing with. So let's continue. This is another quote I found about love from Kobun Chino. He says, Dogen never appeared in the city. People who kept Dogen's materials were the ones who went up the high mountain to see him. His life was direct and straight in a way that present man cannot feel or deal with. He had been a monk from age 13 until his death day, never knew a woman. He almost never talked about women, so it is sometimes difficult for women to study this material. An example of the way he spoke about love is, to deeply consider about gratitude, grateful love, is to throw away grateful love. He is saying to free the object from one's attachment is to keep it. So that's another interesting quote about love, and he's quoting Dogen from memory, and I was unable to trace what this quotation might be in the Nishijima Cross version of Dogen, but I have a vague sort of memory of hearing something like that in Dogen's writings, but I don't know exactly what he's referencing. And the way it's spoken, he says, to deeply consider gratitude, grateful love is to throw away grateful love. So he's correcting himself as he speaks, and he's probably referencing something in his mind. But it's to free the object from one's attachment is to keep it. So to let go of love. Sometimes one of the problems of love is that it's used, the word love is used as a word to mean insisting that the object of your love must remain static and the same all the time. And that's a problem with love. You can't love a living being who you insist must never change, must always be the way you think they should be. So that's a kind of attaching love. And here's another quote from Kobun Chino about love. It is only in very recent times that I really noticed the difference between purity of love and attachment, and I'm very much aware of my attachment in love. One is attached to parts of the whole thing. I really understand now why Bodhidharma said not to give birth to attachment in the truth of non-attachment, or I think it should be is the truth of non-attachment. Non-attachment is truth. To be fond of things, particularly your favorite things, is what attachment means. In such situations, we give birth to attachment. I like this, I don't like this. But when we begin to sense why we like this and don't like that, it becomes very complicated. Sometimes unlike and dislike go together. I think maybe he means like and dislike. And then he says, sometimes alike and dislike go together. That is, if you see somebody who is very much like you, you dislike that person. I certainly do. This sticking to each other or rejecting each other is very hard because intellect doesn't help, and emotion is no way to solve it. That's another interesting quote about love and attachment, and that's one of the things you'll find in Zen is that whenever love comes up, the subject of attachment also comes up. Also, one of the things I tend to do when talking about love, when this subject comes up, is to switch the conversation to a conversation about compassion, because there's a lot more about compassion in Buddhist literature than there is about love. I'm not going to do that in this video because I wanted to specifically stick to the point of love, but I thought it was important to kind of make that point. Another thing where love comes up, which is kind of taking it in a different direction, is in the 12-fold chain of codependent co-origination, which I've talked about on this channel before. And here it is. This is a quote from the Lotus Sutra. This is the Buddha. This is suffering, this is the accumulation of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the way of the cessation of suffering. That's the Noble Eightfold Path. And he preached extensively, he being Buddha, the law of the 12 causal connections. Ignorance leads to action, action leads to consciousness, consciousness leads to name and form lead to the 6 sense organs, the 6 sense organs lead to contact, that's 5, contact leads to feeling, feeling leads to love, love leads to taking, taking leads to new existence leads to life, life leads to aging, death, grief, sorrow, suffering, and distress. And then it goes back through this same chain and says if ignorance ceases, then action ceases. If action ceases, then name and form cease, and all this rest of it. But you notice love comes near the end of the list, and this kind of reminds me of what I mentioned in the previous video about the Advaita Vedanta idea of love. So love, feeling leads to love. So emotion, general emotion comes first, and then love comes next. And then love leads to trying to take in everything, and that leads to the whole formation of the universe. You know, this is a very weird metaphysical claim that the Buddhists make, but it's interesting to see where love fits in there. And when this is written in Chinese, the word is I, is love, is very definitely a word that would be translated by anybody as love. And now here is one of the few instances I can find of Dogen talking about love. The word love doesn't appear very often, but here's a place where it appears. I found several instances, but usually he was talking about, in kind of disparagingly, the love for fame and gain, or the love for, just things that we're supposed to avoid on the Buddhist path. But here's one where he talks about it differently. This is from an essay called Gyoji. He says, "Have no regard for your own body and life. Do not cling to love, which is more dumb than that of birds and beasts. Even if you feel love and attachment, it will not stay with you over long years. Do not remain content to rely upon family standing, which is equal to rubbish. Even if you remain content at this, you will ultimately not enjoy a quiet life." So it's a bit disparaging on the subject of love. So I'm kind of presenting these to you as raw data that you can do with as you will. That's kind of what I do on this video channel often. But I think it's interesting to hear the way that love is used in this tradition, because it's certainly very different from the way it's used in the Christian tradition, and just the way that the word love is used colloquially among speakers of the English language. So it's quite a different idea, and I hope that made some sense, and I hope that was edifying to you. And if you want to contribute to me edifying you more, you can go to the URL you are seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main ways of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta support me if you don't want to support me. But I thank you if you do. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Love ya. Bye. Ziggy, what do you love? Do you love your sock? Do you love all the people that you get to bark at? Do you love the things you're smelling? Yeah. All right, we'll see you later, Ziggy. You're certainly lovable.